Welcome back to Honoring the Journey. I'm Leslie Nease, and I am so excited today to welcome somebody who I feel like I know you, Mason. His name is Mason Mennenga. He is an aspiring theologian, YouTuber, and he calls himself the internet's youth pastor, which I got to know more about that. He's also the host of a podcast called A People's Theology and also the Black Sheep podcast presented by HM Magazine. And you know what? He's a guest today on Honoring the Journey, and I can't wait to hear more about your journey, Mason. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. You listed a lot of things I do in the world, and I'm glad to add being a guest on your podcast as
Yeah,
one of those many things that I do in the world.
yeah, you got to make sure you put that in your bio.
That's right.
I
Yeah,
was a guest on Leslie Nease's
that's right.
podcast.
And not even just on my bio. I'll put it on my resume
Oh,
if it
heck
helps, I
yes.
guess.
That's what I'm talking about. Thank you. No, it's funny. I am kind of a new podcast in the deconstruction world, I guess, but just trying to kind of do what I've done for many, many years, just in a different way. Because
Yeah.
I kind of, grew up in ministry doing Christian radio, stuff like that. And now I get
Hmm.
to do it in the deconstruction community. Kind of
Love
cool.
it.
I'm
Great.
excited to have you here. So, I like to start the podcast off with just sort of like a random question. And today I created one just for you, Mason. I
Oh.
haven't asked anybody this question yet. So, the question I want to know to get to know you as a person is what is one of the most significant turning points in your life?
Mm.
I know I'm going to start off deep.
I mean, there have been so many significant moments in my life. I'm trying to think if there's like one
Did one like
particular
jump out
moment.
immediately and you were like, no, there's probably more. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I can certainly talk more about it, and I'm sure it kind of fits well with the kind of deconstruction podcast that you're doing. But I still remember very, very clearly going into my very first class of college, and I went to a small little Christian college in Iowa,
Oh,
and so
wow.
I went to my very first class, and we were it's like a syllabus day, right? Where you just
Right.
sit there and you go through the entire syllabus. And I remember sitting through this, and I think I'm sure I had received the syllabus beforehand or whatever, and maybe we were supposed to read like a part of a book beforehand or whatever. But I just remember sitting in that class, and we were going over this book called Postmodern Youth Ministry. And
Mm,
I remember thinking to myself, all right, I have no idea what postmodern means, but I know
mhm.
I'm not supposed to like it. I know enough about that. And so I was really confused by the fact that it was
In
connected
the
to this word youth ministry,
syllabus.
and it
Wait
was a
a
youth ministry
minute.
class, so it wasn't like a
Yeah.
math class and we were talking about postmodern youth ministry. It was an
It made
actual
sense.
youth ministry class, so
Right, yeah.
that part of it made sense. But, yeah, what didn't make sense was this word postmodern connected to this word youth ministry, and so I just was like, This is weird." But so I remember reading through the book because obviously it was an assigned book to this class, so if I wanted to pass this class, I was gonna have to read this book. So I start reading this book, and I quickly realized that the author of this book had very, very similar questions that I've been having for probably the last like year or so about my faith. And it really opened me up to realize, oh, there's at least one other Christian in the world that has the same doubts and questions about their faith as I had have. And
Isn't
so
that the
that was
best
a big,
feeling?
huge, huge moment for me to
Yeah.
realize that I was not the only one.
Right.
As an Enneagram 4, normally I try to be the only kind of person in the world like myself. I really try my best to do that as an Enneagram 4, but this was like the first moment in my life that I realized I am not the only one who has these kind of questions and doubts about my faith. And that was such a significant moment for me to realize, oh wait, there's so much more to the world than I had
Yeah.
realized. And so that was a big moment for me.
You know what? I remember when I first was, like, going through deconstruction, didn't even know that's what it was called. I don't even remember, like, what I searched, um, on, like, Apple Podcasts or whatever, and I found
Mm.
Holy Heretics, and I went,
Oh yeah.
"Okay, wait a minute. That sounds like me." I think I might like these people. And
Right.
I, like, sat down and I could not stop listening because I was like, "Holy crap." You know what I mean?
Mm.
It was amazing. So then, of course, everybody that they had on had a podcast, and so then I found their podcasts, and
Right.
I found your podcast, and I've listened to so many, and I realized I'm not crazy, and it was the first time I ever heard what postmodernism is. I didn't even know that's what it was.
Mhm.
I had
Mhm.
somebody call me that, and I was like, "What is that? I need to look that up." So, do you wanna
Yeah, what
explain what
yeah,
postmodern
what
yeah,
postmodern is?
yeah. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different routes we could go with this. Well, let's go with kind of the more technical definition of it. So, postmodernism started in the 1960s with a number of different philosophers, but the one that sort of, kind of coined the term, if you will, his name was Jacques Derrida. It's like the most
Mm,
French name ever. And
kind
so
of a fun
Jacques
name, though.
Derrida again, he was a philosopher, so he was like this
Right.
really brainiac, smart guy, and what he was trying to do was really uncover like how language operates in the world, like how we use language. And so, for example, one of the things that he would talk about, and this sort of fits under the idea of deconstruction that he would talk about, is when we say the word God, we realize that you would have to realize that the word God is not God itself, right? The word
Right.
God is a symbol or a sign that points to this reality or what we think is a reality called God. Or take out
This
God. Think about
mystery.
justice, for
Yeah.
example, right? Like when we
Okay.
say we want justice in the world, the word justice itself is not the thing itself, right? It
Mhm.
is the word justice is just simply a sign that helps us to uncover or try to get a sense of what it is that we're trying to do or trying to think about in the world, right? And so that's essentially, or kind of in a very, 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 very basic way. And I'm sure there's actual postmodern philosophers who are like, ah, you're really butchering that. But that's kind of what Jacques Derrida was trying to get at when he was talking about deconstruction and the way that language operates in the world.
Okay, interesting. Well, I love that you are this aspiring theologian because, man, I can just pick your brain about all kinds of fun stuff, and you'll probably, like, really enjoy talking about it, which
Well,
is
there, I
super
mean,
fun.
I will enjoy talking about cooking,
I
the
know.
NFL, or about,
Or theology.
philosophical theology if
Yeah,
you wanna talk about
whatever.
that too. I mean, I can kinda do all of those things.
He wears many hats and
That's
has
right.
very cool hair, I have to say. Yeah,
Well, thank you. I
love your
just put
hair.
it in a bun just,
Super
to
cool.
look nice for
He's
this
got the
podcast.
man
I don't know
bun
if you
look
put the
going on.
video out, but hopefully
I
people
do.
aren't, Oh, you do? Okay, well, oh, I should have
You
made
should have
I
done your
can make this
makeup.
setup way fancier, and now
No,
I
it's
feel like I'm
okay.
really screwing you over.
No, 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 no. Listen, here's what I do. I usually don't do the YouTube until a few weeks later. You know what I mean? I'll have it out just and we'll just have like videos of us as like,
Great.
promotions or whatever. But anyway, um so okay, Mason, let's talk a little bit about Little Mason. How did you grow up
Yeah.
and what kind of environment was it?
Yeah. So I grew up I was the firstborn in my family, and my parents weren't supposed to have children. My mom had cancer when she was in her mid 20s, and
Oh,
I don't know what I don't know. I'm not a cancer treatment person at all. My guess is back then when you had cancer treatment, it was pretty invasive and pretty hard
right.
on your body, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's still the case to this day. I don't know. But back when my mom had cancer in I think would have been probably late 80s maybe. It was it was really difficult on her body, and so after she went into remission, she was told that the chemotherapy and the radiation had killed her entire reproductive system.
Oh,
And so she sort of went into this relationship with my dad, kind of thinking, all right, well, I'm just never going to be able to have children. Maybe they could adopt, or, that they could figure
mhm.
it out. But they just sort of knew that they weren't going to have their own biological children. Well, roughly about 3 months after they got married, my mom starts experiencing things like morning sickness and, all the classic signs of pregnancy, right?
Right.
And so she's, like, really confused by this. Sure enough, she is pregnant with me.
Wow.
And so the doctors are just, like, absolutely stunned by this because, again, in their mind, that her or at least based on what they saw with her reproductive system after all of the, chemotherapy and radiation, was that she didn't have much of a reproductive system to have a child. So they were a little confused, but sure enough, she had a very healthy, normal pregnancy,
That's
and out
awesome.
comes me on July 29th, 1994. And so that was sort of the beginning of, obviously my journey in life. And
Mhm.
so after I was born, I grew up just prototypical conservative evangelicalism, right? So my parents, and the reason why I bring up kind of that pregnancy story is for my mom, at least, this is like a miracle child, at least in her
Right.
mind, right? That this is
Yeah.
like, what? This is amazing. And my mom, she had grown up Catholic, and then my dad, and my dad had sort of grown up evangelical essentially, and my mom left Catholicism and became an evangelical when they started dating. And so all of that, right? Like it just was a very intense evangelical experience for me as a
Yeah.
child because my mom was essentially a convert to evangelicalism, which when you're a convert to something, especially early on, you're pretty intense about it typically.
100%. Yes.
Right, and then you
100%.
add to the fact that, like, in her mind, she had just had a miracle
Miracle
child, so, like,
child. Yes.
that's just only more proof that
Oh
this
my word.
evangelical thing is right, and
Yeah.
so, anyway, it was just the experience of growing up evangelical was pretty intense for me, and so, all the music I ever learned, the first music that I had as a child, I would imagine that children my age were probably listening to, I don't know, Barney songs or whatever. And I'm sure I listened to that stuff too. But the first music I remember listening to was Veggie Tales, right? So that was a big part of my life when I was a little kid. And then eventually got into all the like CCM stuff like Michael W. Smith and Amy Grant. I still remember all of those Amy Grant
Oh, yeah.
Christmas songs from her
Oh,
Christmas
yeah.
album.
I still listen to it. It's just
They're
so
great. I mean, Amy's
yeah,
just absolutely
nostalgic,
wonderful.
man. She's fabulous.
Yeah, so I like those were our, whenever Christmas season rolls around and I hear a Amy Grant song, I'm just immediately transported back to like the late 90s. And
Yes.
so anyway, that was my experience growing up, right? It's going to church every single Sunday, going to Sunday school in the mornings
Mhm.
before church service would start or whatever. And so it was the kind of prototypical evangelical experience where it was
And
just
probably
that was my whole life, right?
your community, everything, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
so
really relate.
Yeah, and then once I got into youth group, so once I got old enough to go to youth group, obviously I was going to youth group every Wednesday, and I grew up a block away from my church, so that was, I just if I wanted to go hang out somewhere, if I was bored, I would just go to the
Go to
church like that.
church.
That's how evangelical I was when I was bored, I would go to church. So that was my life for quite
Yeah.
some time, and it was during the latter part of my high school life, so probably like my junior or senior year, just started to have some questions about like human sexuality and
Mhm.
my faith. I obviously I'd grown up in purity culture where I was like told to abstain from sex, and I grew up in the kind of purity culture where I was discouraged from dating. I
Oh,
ended up
yeah.
going to
Oh,
this,
yeah.
small Christian college like I mentioned before, and I got there and then everybody was already in a relationship, and not just that everybody was in a relationship, but probably by the end of the year they're going to be married kind of thing,
Ring by
right? Like
spring. Ring by
yeah,
spring
exactly. Ring by
is
spring, you're gonna
yeah,
be married at 19, having
MRS
2 children
degree.
by the time that you graduate college. Like that was my experience going into
You
college,
just
and I realized
explained all of my I have 2 older kids who are about your age, and
okay,
they all of their friends are, like have, like, 5
yep,
kids, have been married forever.
yeah. Yeah, my
Yeah.
best friend's about to celebrate his 10th anniversary. I'm not married at all. So it's like unbelievable to me that like there are so many people
Yeah.
out there that are my age that have been married for so long.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
So you
so
grew up in the, like, oh, what was the KJ52
oh
era?
god, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you did. Oh my gosh. You would have loved my kids. You guys would have been
Yeah.
buds. It would have been
Yeah, so
fun.
all the, like, Tooth and Nail stuff,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
those kinda alternative bands, Switchfoot, Reliant K, so that
Oh,
was all the music I was listening to when I was in youth group,
yep.
so, yeah, that was my entire world, and so, yeah, fortunately, I've loved that music so much that
Yeah.
that's why I have the music podcast where I get to interview a lot of those kinda artists, so that's kind of
That's so
a
fun.
cool part of my life right now, but, yeah, so I grew up in the kind of purity culture where I was not allowed to date, and I found out later on that there was a purity culture where it was like, you're supposed to date to get married as soon as you can kind of
Yeah.
thing, and I was like, "Oh, I had no
So you
idea that
don't
kind of purity culture
go
existed."
lust and do things wrong.
Right, yeah, so it's like, if you can't control your lust, get married at 18 kind of
Yeah.
thing, and I'm like, I that was not the purity culture I grew up in. I was
Yeah.
just told, yeah,
Don't
if
date.
let's see if
Don't
you
go
can
near
make it to
them.
30 without getting even, your kiss in, and then we'll maybe talk about marriage
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. So,
Mhm.
that was the kind of purity culture I grew up in, and so I started having a lot of these kind of questions around, is this really what the Bible teaches? Is this really all that's in store for me for the next number of years as I can't even kiss anyone? And obviously being a 17-year-old boy with hormones running through my body. I was like, This just doesn't make much sense with my
Yeah, I
lived
don't think
experience
this
right
is
now.
gonna
Like,
work.
yeah, I'm like, everything about me was like, I just want to kiss a girl so bad. And so, yeah, it was such a kind of a weird experience.
Mason, that was just
Yeah.
Satan tempting you. That
Yeah,
was all. It's
little
Satan.
did I know. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I remember probably, it's just in the same way you mentioned that you were probably on like Apple Podcasts and you like typed in something and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden you got introduced to all of these different kinds of Christians. I
Mhm.
still remember typing in something like, does the Bible actually say that you can't have sex before marriage, or something along those lines? I googled and started reading through like all these different blog posts about it, and that, again, that was sort of my, like, first. When I look back now, I'm like, "Oh, that's kinda when I started deconstructing," is I
Yeah.
was starting to have questions about my faith, especially as it related to purity culture. And at the same time, I was starting to have some doubts about just kind of the political nature of my faith. Obviously growing up in conservative evangelicalism, you only supported Republicans, everything was
Mhm.
about supporting pro-life candidates, that kind of thing. And it was around that time that a lot of states were starting to legalize gay marriage here in the
Mhm.
United States.
Yep.
And so I still remember thinking to myself, and it's funny to think back now, but I remember thinking to myself, you know, gay people are going to hell, but who am I to say that they can't get married? And I
And that
remember
felt
thinking,
right to say, didn't it?
right, and I'm like, I think, it's a funny thing to think about now, but
I
at the time,
know.
that was for
Yeah, I
me, I was,
know.
like, differentiating the kind of faith that I had grown up in,
Mhm.
and that was pretty significant for me to
Yeah.
realize, "Oh, wait, I can, like, think about my faith maybe a little differently than what I was taught at church or by my
Right.
parents." And so that was kind of a big moment for me, in that, again, kinda, like, proto deconstruction, if you will, for me. And
Mhm.
then I, told the story about how I went to my very first college class and started, realizing that there was at least one other Christian. So that was all kind of that first early part of my deconstruction. And so, yeah, but obviously looking back, it's like I just had the prototypical
Yeah.
conservative
Sounds like it.
evangelical experience, where it's just, praise and worship kind of music, youth group every Wednesday, going to mission trips, going on, to the big youth conferences. Like, well, I went to Acquire the Fire once, then I went to like the diet version of that called Dare to Share.
Nice.
And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
yeah, I just was, prototypical conservative evangelical youth group kid experience, especially for somebody who like was growing up in the 2000s. That was, I would
Yeah.
imagine anybody else who had that kind of experience, we probably have the exact same childhood.
Yeah, it's there's not a lot of differences, you know what I mean? You're,
Yeah,
like, in it and everybody's the same. It's
yeah.
very, very similar.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's why, connecting with a lot of other people who have deconstructed it, it's kind of unbelievable when we start, like, chatting with each other and we start
It's
sharing
fun.
our experiences with each other, and we're like, "Oh my god, we literally the same person? Did How have I not known you my whole life?" Because it is one of those things where you don't realize, like, how insular your experience in the
Yeah.
world is growing up
Mhm.
until you meet other people who lived thousands of miles away, and they had the exact same experience, and it's like,
Yeah.
how is that even possible? Other than the fact that that culture was so insular.
Yeah, you're so right, and when you do meet people, I mean, it's fun to meet them online. I'm actually gonna be meeting people. I cannot wait. I'm going to Theology Beer Camp, and I'm
Oh,
gonna meet
lovely.
people
I'll
for
get
the
to see you
first
there.
time. I get to, like, see people face to face and have conversations. I've wanted to go for years, but it's always near my daughter's birthday, and so I was like, didn't wanna leave, and she's like, "Mom, I'm gonna be 26. I don't care. Like, go, do your thing." I'm like, "Okay." So, at this point, I am going, but,
Love it.
I haven't done that yet, and I get so jealous when I see everybody, because I'm friends with Sarah and she'll post pictures and from Rev Covery, Sarah.
Mhm,
And she'll post pictures and and I'm just like, "Oh, that is so fun." I feel like I know these people, but I don't because I haven't met
mhm,
them. But yeah, you find so much in common when you've been through I call it like we've all been through like collective trauma and
mhm,
now we're coming out of it and finding healing and just being able to have these conversations is life-giving.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Absolutely.
So,
Well, I'm excited to see you at beer camp. It's, one of my
yeah.
favorite times of year. I've been able to do it the last few years, and obviously I've become really good friends with a lot of the people that are a part of beer camp. So I'm excited to see you there.
Yeah, it'll be fun. And it's funny because I am a little older than I think most of the people who are gonna be there, but
No,
I can
no, you're not.
relate.
No, no,
Am I
you
not?
are not.
I
No,
feel like I
no,
am. Well,
no,
yeah, I guess there's a few people who are my age,
no.
but
No,
I'm just excited.
Trip's, fan base is, like, older than Trip.
Really? Okay. Well,
Yes.
that's good to know. I'll fit right in then. Well,
Yep.
in either way, like I'm really good friends with my kids who brought up in this stuff. And they've forgiven me and all as well. We have a great relationship. And so I can connect with pretty much any age group. I don't really care. Age is a number.
That's right.
But so, okay. So you grew up in that. And then all of a sudden you find yourself asking the question, did you have anybody to talk to at this time? Or were you just kind of keeping it to yourself?
A little bit of both. Obviously it was kind of an isolating experience to start deconstructing at a very conservative Christian college. One thing I should say, as much as it was truly a conservative Christian college, the religion department at this college was, like, fairly moderate, let's put it that way. I mean, they were actual scholars, right? Like, they're the Bible professors and the theology professors were, they had legitimate degrees. It's not like they got some online weird degree from somewhere or whatever. They were legitimate scholars who were
Yeah,
well
yeah.
respected. They just happened to be mostly kind of theologically and politically conservative, nowhere near, like, kinda Trump mega kind of
Right, right.
conservatism, but, they were
That's
more or
nice.
less fairly conservative. And because they were scholars in their own right, they at least recognize, even if they disagreed with other more maybe progressive or liberal scholars, they would recognize, oh, those people are legitimate scholars as well. So when I
Right.
start reading different books from, like, I don't know, Brian McLaren or whoever else, my professors were really encouraging to, like, yeah, go explore that, like, learn more about that. That is important. And, come to your own conclusions on it. And when you write papers, like, cite your sources, and that's what all that matters really does. Like, make clear arguments, cite your sources, and that really is all that mattered. So I was really supported by my professors to
Wow, that's
really
nice.
explore the kind of faith that I was encountering at that time in college. And so, yeah, that was really helpful. Obviously, back home, I quickly realized, oh, these are not the kind of conversations I can have with my parents. I tried to early on
Yeah,
when I started deconstructing, because I thought for my parents, at least from when I thought to myself about my parents' perspective, I thought they would be really encouraging to me in this kind of exploration. Because for me, the way I thought about it, again, it wasn't the word deconstruction back then.
right,
But for
right.
me, I was like, "Oh, I'm kinda taking my faith really seriously, and I'm sorta making it my own," and I thought my parents would really be encouraging on that. And then quickly I realized, oh, the reason why, they probably would be supportive of me of doing that if I didn't come to the wrong conclusions in their mind, right? And so that was, that was something
That's
I
hard.
realized pretty quickly, is I actually can't have these kind of conversations with my family. I'm more than open to it, but they just were not in a place to
Yeah,
have those kind of conversations. And
I
so,
get that.
yeah, in some respects, yes, I was supported and was able to be open with some people about the fact that I was starting to think about my faith differently. And then clearly, when it came to, like, people back home, people at my church that I had grown up with, those were the kind of people I was not going to be able to have those kind of conversations with.
That's interesting. So, okay, how is that now? Are you able to do that at this point in your walk or
Not that I have been able to experience.
figure out? Yeah.
Obviously, I've been able to connect with so many
Oh,
people
right.
outside
Yeah.
of now my college, through Twitter and podcasting and all these different ways. I've been able to connect with so many different people. So I've been able to have these kind of conversations very openly.
Right.
Obviously, I even went to seminary and everything. But back home, yeah, I'm still not really able to have those kind of conversations. Yeah, I would love to.
Interesting.
It's just I
Yeah.
don't think my family, my parents, my home church, they're just not in a place to they're not in a place to listen to those kind of conversations or
Right.
listen to my story without trying to correct. Yeah, and so that,
Yeah.
like, I would be fine even if they disagreed, like, that I'm fine
Right.
with having those kind of
Yeah.
conversations where they're like, "Yeah, I disagree with your theological or political conclusions, but I am open and I want to know your story." I don't think a lot of people back from kind of that life back
Mhm.
home are in that place where they could listen to my story and not feel like the compulsion to correct it.
It's interesting because I would say the majority of my clients, I'm a deconstruction coach. The majority of them are struggling in this area. And they're
Mhm.
like, "I really just want to say," and I'm like, "No, see, that's you being an evangelical again. Like
Right.
you don't have to like you don't owe them anything. Like just
Mhm.
love them,
Yep.
respect them. What would that look like if you
Yeah.
just, because I think remembering we were once there. I remember the fear when my son was pulling away, like, and didn't want anything to do with the God that I had, and it was horrifying. It was terrifying. And I just remember thinking the enemy's got my son. I was just
Right.
afraid all the time. And so what I try to do, there are people in my life who I can talk to, not very many. Um, I can tell there's a couple of people that I'll talk to, especially my mom. I love her and she's so accepting and kind, but I can tell she's concerned.
Mm,
So I have to be careful. And then like other people in my family, like I can't talk to at all. It would just freak them out. And I'm
yeah.
not going to I don't want to be the source of that to someone. So
Yeah.
we can just agree just to not talk about it. And
Yep.
and that's okay. But
Yeah.
we're not taught that in evangelicalism. In evangelicalism,
Mhm.
you got to tell everybody everything that you believe and they need to
Yeah.
believe it too or they're going to hell, you know.
Yeah. You all gotta be accountability partners to
Yeah.
each other, and yeah, and I still have a good relationship with my
Yeah.
parents, like, I love
Exactly.
them.
Right.
In fact, I think I called them pretty recently, and we see each other maybe every few months or whatever, and so I have a more or less good relationship with them.
Right.
We just aren't there's a significant part of me that they probably will never know, or at least they have not given an indication so
That
far that they
they're
would ever
ready.
like to know this pretty significant part of my life, which is fine. I can be the kind of person that it seems like one of those things where in every relationship, there's sort of a certain part of you that maybe is a little bit more accentuated or emphasized, right?
Mm,
And there's a part of me that loves sports or whatever, and that's the part that gets accentuated or emphasized when I go back home, right?
right.
And so, but there's a significant part of me where I'm sort of have to de-emphasize that, and obviously that's sort of the theology part of me, the public work that I do. I have to de-emphasize that when I go home, which is fine. Like I'm more
Yeah.
than willing to do that, and that's fine with me.
Just be
It's
all
not like I
things to
have to
all
live it on
people.
a daily like it's not a daily reality for me.
Right.
It's not like I see my parents every single day. So, yeah,
And you're doing it out of a heart of love
yep,
and kindness and a gentleness that, some people just aren't ready. And I remember hearing Rob Bell say, you just can't take somebody someplace they're not ready to go.
yep,
So you got to quit trying.
yep,
Sometimes you just got to let it go and just love them. And that to me, it was so hard initially because, I had to deprogram myself with making sure that everybody agreed with me, making sure everybody felt the exact same way I did because what I believed was true. And then when you deconstruct, you sort of let go of all that dogma
yeah,
and it just starts to feel so good. And you're like, okay, I know they're not there yet, but that's okay. I can just be in the moment,
yeah.
you know?
You mentioning, that Rob Bell quote where it's like you can't take somebody where they're not ready to go, and that has really rung true for me in my life. And as much as a lot of conservative evangelical people, maybe even including my parents, I don't know, they probably think that I'm just like some heretic that doesn't even believe in God. The funny thing is, after I've deconstructed now, or however you would want to describe it, I feel like this is going to be a big fancy theology word called pneumatology, which is basically
Mhm.
the theology of the Holy Spirit, right?
Right.
And
Mhm.
so I would say my understanding of the Holy Spirit has even like maximized even more since deconstructing, because in my mind, in my really powerful experience of kind of like leaving evangelicalism, deconstructing and everything, I think of that, at least in my own life, as a like very spirit-led movement where,
Mm.
again, I grew up super insular. I had no idea that there were any other kind of Christians out there. And then all of a sudden I start getting this movement within me, that something stirred within me to think, maybe I don't really agree with this anymore, or like maybe I should start questioning this or whatever, right? And there is nothing that contributed to that other than this movement that happened within me. And the only thing uh I can attribute that to is the spirit of God moving
Spirit.
within me, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so the spirit of God was working within me
Mhm.
and trying to lead me to a new place.
Right.
And to me, I'm like, I believe even more that the spirit of God moves all the time in the world. And so I like have a sort of higher or more maximized understanding of the spirit of God in the world than I probably did when I was an evangelical, which is kind of ironic. But a lot of that is just, again, my own personal experience of getting to this moment where I realized, oh, maybe I do think of these things differently. And so the Spirit of God was ready to move me, right? But there are a lot of people in the world where the Spirit of God ain't moving for them, right?
Yeah.
There is not ain't moving right now for them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and you can't you're it is not our job as people who are deconstructed or whatever. It's not our
Mhm.
job to move people where they're not ready to move, right? That is
No,
something that that is the job of the Holy Spirit, at least in my mind. That is
absolutely.
the job of the Spirit of God to
Yeah,
move in their lives. And when the Spirit does, then great. They have a wonderful resource in you as a loved one to help them along, right? Wonderful. But your job is not to help
absolutely.
them along until the
Right.
Spirit of God has moved in their life. So, all that's to
I
say,
love
I
that.
kind of
That's so
really think the
true.
Spirit of God more highly now than I did when I was an evangelical.
Well, and a lot more mysterious and lovely, and I think what I had to do in my process, I guess you could say, is I had to let go of fear first. I had to let go of
Mm,
fear. Fear of hell, fear of Satan, fear of God, fear and when I say fear of God, I don't mean the respect one, because every time I say, "I'm not afraid of God," people go, "Well, you really should be." And it's like, "No, I don't think that's what that verse means." I'm pretty sure it means respect, reverence, that kind of
right.
thing. But, I had to let go of the fear so that I was okay with going in a direction that felt very different than what my expectation would have been. And
Mhm,
if I didn't let go of that fear, I would have never gone anywhere. And that was nobody did that for me. I had to do it myself.
mm,
And when I was ready, that's when I let go. And that's when I was able to move past it and move toward, I feel, a richer spirituality than what I had
mhm,
before. And
mhm,
that's not to
mhm,
say that people who are in evangelicalism can't have rich spirituality. I'm sure they do. I just personally wrestled with way too much fear to be able
mhm,
to feel that freedom and enjoyment that I was
mhm,
longing for in the
mhm.
faith. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very, very similar experience. I would imagine, again, when I was starting to Google some of these questions about my faith, I would
Mm.
imagine I was probably deleting that search history,
Oh,
almost
I'm
as if
sure
I
you
was
were.
like searching porn itself or whatever, right? Because again,
Porn
I
would have
was in
been
this
easier
mode,
to explain.
right? Well, exactly. And I think highlights this fact that like even when I was starting to question things about my
Mhm.
faith, I was still living in that I was operating out of fear still, right?
Yeah.
And, I think back and it's kind of funny to think that I was probably deleting some of that search history. But yeah, I mean, that was probably certainly the case because again, I was operating out of that fear that, oh, I don't know if God can handle
Right.
me questioning some of these really deeply held beliefs, which
Yeah.
is a
He's so
bizarre thing to
fragile,
think that
that God.
the God of the universe can't handle little old
Your
Masons
questions.
searching and trying to figure out what he actually believes. It's kind of funny to think back, but that's how a lot of us grew up,
It
right?
is
That
how you
nope,
feel,
God can't
though.
handle you
Right.
questioning a few things about what you believe.
Yeah, he may just have to send you to hell for that.
Hmm.
And all of it, I mean, it's odd because, like, when I'm in it, it felt like, "Okay, this makes sense." But as soon as you
Hmm.
come out of it, you're like, "Oh my word." And I think a lot of me opening up my eyes, was coming and living we were in the Bible Belt, and now we live in Utah. So I'm
Hmm.
like the minority in a religion. This LDS is the big religion here, and so
Yeah,
seeing them do their thing, and it's very similar looking to what I did, and I was
right.
told they were a cult, and then I was like, "Wait a
Yeah.
minute, am I a cult? Am I a cult? What is happening here?" Like, it was so weird to realize, wow, wow, and I'm not saying that I
It's
was,
pretty
I'm
funny
just
when you move
saying.
from the Bible Belt and you somehow end up in a place even more conservative and insular.
Yes. It's more conservative, but I will tell you, I don't know, it's a different kind of they're a little better at least making me feel like they're not judging me for where I'm at.
Mm,
I felt very judged in the Bible Belt, and so I was afraid to ask these questions. So moving here was like freedom to be able to just like
mhm,
do what I felt like I needed to do in my own walk with God, whatever that looked like. But yeah, it was interesting though. I just remember hearing them say things, and I'd be like, "Man, we say that," or they do things, and be like, "Hey, we do that." Like, wait a minute, if they're a cult and they're going to hell, well, what makes us any different? I mean,
mhm,
it's just weird. It was such a wake up call for me.
mhm.
So when you graduated from school, um, and got out of, I guess, what was your degree in?
I was still a youth ministry degree. So
Okay.
what was interesting again was even though I was deconstructing, I became even more passionate about I want to help other people in their faith, and so I was like, even though I no longer believe a lot of the things that I went into college believing, I still really was passionate about helping other people in their faith, and so I was like,
Yeah,
"Well, youth
same.
ministry seems like a good next step in that." So that's what I ended up majoring in was youth
Wow.
ministry.
So youth
That
ministry,
really
did you
useful
become a
degree in
youth
youth
pastor?
youth ministry. Yeah, so I became a youth pastor after I graduated from college, so I moved to Minneapolis and started working at a very progressive church in
Oh, nice.
Minneapolis. Yeah, I was pastored by a person who was one of those people that I read in college that helped kinda transform my life, and so, yeah, it was this great little church that I was a part of, and yeah, started doing that for a little while. And around that time I also started seminary, so I started my master of divinity, and have kind of bounced around like some other jobs. And uh, I'm no longer a youth pastor at that church. I
Yeah,
That ended around like 2020. But yeah, I did the whole seminary thing and have been working at a seminary since then. And so have, that was also when I started the podcast and started kind of, taking Twitter more seriously, and all that, the whole thing. So that's when all of that kind of started, was after college.
yeah, and you get a lot of heat. Sometimes,
Once or twice a
Mason,
day.
I just cannot stop laughing at some of the things you post because when people come after you, you, like, post it, you're like, "Yep, this is what I get."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh my
I mean,
gosh."
it's publicly available information, like,
I know,
somebody will see it, so I might as well, like, this
like
person willingly posted this publicly, so they're not trying to hide it, so I'm like, "Well,
right.
might as well just share it with the whole world," because I think some of the things that they post are really funny, even though they're
They
not trying to be
are.
funny.
Well, it's funny because you're like, "Oh my word." Like, it or I don't know. Sometimes I feel like the way that, some evangelicals come at people like you or like me, can seem very unloving. And if they're doing it to protect God or to protect the name of God or their religion, it's falling flat when you don't I don't know. There's a scripture about, a clinging symbol. Um,
Mhm,
but yeah, the way dehumanizing people to me is the absolute worst thing you can do. And that's what
mhm,
they do to you. And I just
yeah.
can't I just and you laugh about it and I would be like crying if it was me. But
Yeah, I mean, when I was first kind of starting doing Twitter stuff, and initially started getting heat like that, that was difficult. But yeah, I've just kind of learned to shrug
you
it off
grew
pretty
your thick
quickly.
skin.
It's pretty easy at this point. Like, I don't really
Yeah.
think about it. These people
Yeah.
probably think about me a lot, and I truly don't think about
Think
them
about
at all.
them. Yeah.
Other than like the 5 seconds it
Post it
takes
and
to
be like,
reply to
"Haha,
them.
look at this, guys."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really all I think about. Like, to me, they're just all one person. I know there's
Yeah.
thousands of them, but they're just all the same person to me. So I
Yeah.
again, like, I don't
Oh,
really
that's a
give
good
much
point.
thought of who they are. Um, but, yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of the things that they say are rather unloving, unkind, and the thing is, like, I don't think when I was at my most conservative evangelical, I probably thought a lot of the things that they thought about other
Right, right.
Christians or about other people, but I think I would have filtered it through a much more kind way. So
Yeah, yeah.
it does seem like there is, and maybe it's because of Trump, I don't know, but there does
Oh,
seem to be
yeah.
this, like, permission to be extremely unkind, uh,
Yes.
that, like, didn't even exist, at least when I was around. Like,
Yep.
when you disagreed with somebody as an evangelical, when you thought they were a heretic, like, you at least, like, filtered it through this, like, gentle way. But
Yeah.
now it's just, like, very upfront and unkind and
Or at least
sometimes really
passive
nasty.
aggressive. I mean,
Yeah, it's
passive
just
aggressive at
really
least. Come on. Why you
yeah,
gotta be so
it's
aggressive?
really interesting, and I just don't remember, at least when I was at my most conservative evangelical, like, maybe behaving like that.
Hmm.
But, yeah, maybe things have changed. Maybe these are just a certain kinda segment of
Right.
evangelicalism. I
It's
don't
probably
know,
not
but
most
it
of
is
them, I
interesting.
would say. I would say it's probably not most of them. But I do think Trump, you totally hit the nail on the head there. He has shown us what it's like to talk like that and
Yeah,
to be cruel and that you get rewarded for it. And, we
yeah,
see more politicians doing that. We see more, evangelicals doing that. And to me, it's just, I don't know, yet another, um, I don't know, confirmation to me that I did the right thing in
yeah,
leaving. And
yeah,
2016 was when I really just was like, okay, enough. I'm done. Um,
yeah,
can't do this.
yeah,
And then 2020, it just took me over the edge. I was like, huh,
yeah.
so done.
Yeah,
But I
I
tried.
remember growing up listening to Rush Limbaugh. That was always on the radio, and, Rush Limbaugh had that kind of behavior in the world where
Mhm,
he just was really, really nasty to people he didn't
mhm.
like. And again, like, and what's funny about, like, Rush Limbaugh was not a conservative evangelical. I don't think he was even really a Christian, but certainly, like, we would almost identify him as like a Christian nationalist in the sense of like what he valued and what he
Mhm,
wanted in the world. And what's interesting is, I still remember there was this big controversy when Rush Limbaugh, and I don't remember the exact story, but I remember he called some women or a woman like a whore. Um,
mm,
and I remember that happening. And even at that time, I was still super conservative and evangelical. I was thinking that that's probably not the way to behave in the world. And it just like did not make sense to me that my dad would like praise this guy,
mhm.
and yet he would like, I don't think my dad would have ever behaved like that, and so it just
Yeah.
never made sense of, like, how can you praise this guy, but also you yourself for sure would be convicted not to ever say something like that about a woman, and
Mm,
so I just like, those sort of things never made much sense, but then when Trump came to power and, realized, like, the way he just talked about people all the time, I'm like, "Oh, that's the embodiment of how Rush Limbaugh has been for
yeah.
so many people," and there probably are a lot of Christians in the world, maybe my dad included, of that's the kind of person we've been looking for, but all of the other Republican politicians were never willing to go that far. I still remember when McCain was asked a question about Obama being like a Muslim terrorist on like a literal, like live televised town hall, and John McCain saying, I'm not going to accept that kind of behavior. Like, I disagree with
Nice.
Obama on a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to call him names and make up lies about him. And then literally, like, essentially the next Republican candidate that comes to power is this guy who does all the opposite of that. And
Right,
it just
right.
it blew my mind that, people could behave like that. And again, I think the kind of behavior that I receive all the time from a lot of evangelicals is this embodiment of what Trump, I think, has embroiled them to do. And I think there was a long time where even evangelicals themselves were sort of censoring themselves from what they were actually thinking. And then Trump comes along, whether they think he's an evangelical or not, but he really allowed them to sort of desensitize themselves, and now we get the kind of behavior we get, and I see a lot of it on a daily basis.
Yeah, you do. Like, personally, which to
Yeah.
me is, and I know that that's probably the direction I'm headed if I keep speaking up and doing things, and that's fine. And yeah, I think it probably would have crushed me before, but I have noticed that deconstruction has pretty much inoculated me, from the fear of other people's opinions. Like, I just
Mhm.
am to the point where I'm like, if you're not speaking in love, I ain't even listening to you. Like, it's
Right.
just not even gonna happen. If you wanna
Right.
talk to me in a loving way, let's go. Let's talk.
Right.
But you can disagree with me. I mean, I have so many people. There have been so many people from different ministries I've worked in before who have reached out to me and genuinely said, like, help me understand where you're at and what you believe. And I will tell them and they'll say, well, you've clearly thought through this a lot and I respect that. It may not be where I'm at. And that I appreciate. Like, you don't have to. I don't care if you agree with me. It's just where I'm at. And I think that's part of, I don't know, honoring somebody's journey, no
Mhm.
matter what it looks like. Can you not just like honor that and just say you are a person, you have life in you. You have every right to believe what you want and it doesn't affect their life at all.
Mhm.
It's just crazy. But
Mhm.
yeah, it definitely has inoculated me from all that
Yeah,
mess. But
I
I
get
was
that.
as an evangelical woman though, whew, it was all about perception as reality
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I needed to behave a certain way. I couldn't even like I remember when I would go out and like have dinner after I would speak at an event, my mentor would say, "Well, don't order from that type of glass because it looks like it could be alcohol. And you don't want to give the impression that you're drinking alcohol."
Right.
And I was like, "Oh, you're right, you're right." Everything, I was just so afraid of everything.
Right.
What about you? What's the biggest freedom that you have found in all of this?
Yeah. The I think mine is similar in the sense that when I started deconstructing, I realized that this movement of, or what I think to be like kind of the spirit of God moving within me is something I can trust, right? Like,
Mhm.
it used to be before where I had to, everything had to be filtered through what the Bible says or what some sort of pastor might say, and it realized, "Oh, wait, there are moments in my life where I can actually trust what I
Mhm.
believe God to be doing within my soul and my heart. And that was a really big moment for me to know that, when I have these feelings of like really liking some girls, like that isn't Satan trying to attack me. Like that was a big moment for me to realize, no, I
Yeah.
can like trust some of these things, and maybe like even some of those feelings, some of those experiences are actually God moving in my life. And that
Yeah.
was a really big moment for me to sort of trust that. And,
Yeah.
and I really try to, again, I mentioned earlier I'm an Enneagram 4. I really have leaned into that more as I've gotten older, to recognize there are moments in my life where if I feel really, really strongly about something, I think maybe that's God trying to tell me something, and I can trust that.
Mhm. Yeah. And trusting that intuition, I think, has been one of the big freedoms of deconstruction for me, because I was taught not to trust that. No, trust that inner
Right.
voice. Your heart is wicked. You're a mess. You're
Hmm.
disgusting. Oh, but you have Jesus over you. So now when God looks at you, he sees Jesus and not you because you're
Right.
trash. But Jesus. And so then you just kind of like assume that narrative, like, okay, I'm nothing. And you just
Hmm.
make yourself smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where, I mean, like you're hardly discernible. That's how I don't even I had to understand. Have you ever seen the movie with, Julia Roberts is in it? I can't remember which movie it is. It's a really sad one. But she doesn't know what kind of eggs she likes because every time she's with a man, she always likes the same she likes whatever he likes. Like, this guy
Mm.
liked fried eggs, so she ate fried eggs. This guy liked scrambled eggs. And so one day, she's, like, by herself, and she's like, "I don't even know what kind of eggs I like. I usually just like whatever somebody brings me." That was me
Mm.
coming out of a toxic relationship with evangelicalism. Like, "Leslie, what kind of eggs do you like? What do you want?"
Mhm.
And, having that freedom to be able to ask myself that without feeling like I'm being selfish or self-centered or not putting Jesus or others before myself, um, it's liberating, and
Yeah.
I don't feel like that's not God's spirit. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and that's why I've loved kind of the progressive Christian world that I've been in for the last
Yeah.
number of years now, where, if I encounter like a certain theology, I can sort of almost like try it on for size, and or
Mhm.
try it on to see what I think I look like in it. And if I
Yeah.
like it, great. Like, no, yeah,
"Oh,
I'll
this
I'll
fits."
I'll buy into that theology. And if I'm like, oh, I kind of like this a little bit more than that, about that theology, but basically it's sort of like I get to kind of pick and choose what kind of works for me and what I like best. And to know that that's even a possibility was
Mm.
just really revelatory for me.
Oh, that's cool. Well, and the Bible does say, "If you seek me with your whole heart, you'll find me." It doesn't say,
Mhm.
"If you seek me this way, you'll find me."
Mhm.
And I do feel like there's so much more um, liberty that we have been given to find that connection to the divine than what we're taught in religion. I think sometimes it holds us back from really seeking God through experiences, or we're not just like, it doesn't need to just be the Bible. there
Mhm.
God is real in other ways too. It's
Mhm.
it's it's just amazing. And I'm
Yeah.
just thankful to meet people like you on this journey and hear your thoughts and what you've figured out and found out. And I just love it. I love that
Yeah.
so many of us are willing to talk about it. You know,
Mhm.
I don't think 10 years ago this would have been the case. I
Yeah, I
think,
mean, there were I mean, there have been, progressive Christians saying their thing
yeah,
for
for a
some
long
time
time.
now, but yeah, the fact that we have so many people now that, especially like those of us who grew up conservative evangelical, can connect on a place like TikTok or Twitter or
Yeah.
Instagram or whatever it might be, and connect over that experience and try to find a new kind of life. Yeah, we haven't seen anything like that, and I'm hoping that more and more people kinda join that and leave some of the toxic parts of their life, like
Yes.
conservative evangelicalism, behind, to find a life that is actually fulfilling and life-giving to them.
Yeah. And free. And yeah, I love that. And I think it's happening. And I think it's with for every voice that we hear, it's giving others permission to speak their truth and
Yep.
to say where they're at and to not be ashamed. And yeah, I just that's who God is. I really believe. And I feel like the community and the people that are in my life now, I don't feel like I would lose any of you, just for saying I believe something a little different.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, I'm not sure I believe that anymore, but here's how I feel." "Oh, well, that's cool." Like, it's just so nice to be accepted for who I am. and
Yeah.
not for what I believe or don't believe.
Yeah. I mean, I
So,
disagree all the time with all the sort of people in the progressive
yeah.
Christian world. I mean, nobody disagrees with each other more than like progressive Christian people. They constantly are harping on each other about stuff that they disagree on. But at least like where I try to be is like, even if I disagree with you, and could even be something that really is a deep conviction of mine that I disagree on, I'm still really wanting to be in a relationship with somebody that I
Mhm,
really think that this person, even if I disagree with them, they matter in the world, and what they do in the world really matters. And it really is important for me to remain in relationship with that person, even if we have super strong disagreements. I think of someone like Diana Butler Bass. She's become a good friend of mine, and Diana Butler Bass, like, she's typical like kind of establishment Democrat, where the Democrats can do no wrong, and I'm like way more on the left than that, where I'm like, oh god, the Democrats drive me nuts about stuff, and we like disagree with it all the time, and we just are back and forth on it. And also, like, I think of Diana Butler Bass almost like a mother, like a theological mother of
mhm,
mine. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I love her that much. And again, like, just because we disagree on this like certain thing, and we might have strong disagreements about it, we can still love each other in the midst of that.
Right, and what a great example. I think that's the way life is. We don't have to agree. We're not told I mean, that wasn't one of the things that Jesus's message was. "Hey, everybody, you need to agree." No,
Right.
just love. Just
Yeah.
love.
I mean, his disciples, his 12 closest people in his life, all disagree with
Argued
each other all
all
the
the
time about
time.
who this guy was. They probably disagreed with Jesus about who he was, right? Like, I mean, this is a,
Exactly.
a very common theme in the entire gospels, is the
Yeah,
fact that we get the 12 closest people to him constantly not figuring out who he is. Like, and he's just constantly like giving them shit about it too, right? Like, just
yeah,
constantly giving them shit about who do you say I am? And they just get it wrong every single time. And yet
yeah.
he still called them disciples, right? Like,
Mhm.
they were still his disciples. They were the closest people in his life, right? And I I think that's a great example of how we should be living in
Yes.
the world.
Yeah, that is beautiful, and man, thank you so much. I appreciate so much you spending time with us today and sharing your journey, and you'll also be at Theology Beer Camp. Are you gonna be
I
anywhere
will
else this year, or
I will be there. I'm trying to think, oh, I'm sure things will pop up. It sounds like I might be doing a thing, in New Orleans for some podcasting stuff, but, yeah, I'll be around.
well, I'll make sure to put a link, so if you wanna go see Mason in person, hear him speak, and just kinda maybe have a conversation with him face to face.
Hang out in the mountains. Yep, we'll try to get some altitude sickness, and we'll see if we can
Yes.
convert you all to process theology.
Mason, you've been a delight. I've had so much fun with you, and, of course, getting to know you just in person kinda here has been super fun, and I will see you for sure at beer camp, so looking forward to meeting you
Love
face
it.
to face.
We'll see you in October.
Yeah, thank you so much, and, yeah, I'll put some information also for people to come in contact with you, your website,
Great.
all that stuff in the show notes.
Love it.
Thanks, Mason.